We often take them for granted. Heck, in the modern era when almost everything is paid for by card, we even seem to sometimes forget that they exist. But coins have played important roles both in culture and in history. Today, it's possible to look at a coin that was minted 2,000 years ago or more, and every mark on there, it has meaning. And that might be even more true in the modern era when any coin that you have is likely to have a date on it. Sometimes some sort of mark to say where it was minted. It tells you a lot about the history of the coin. And while Americans are generally familiar with the mints in Denver and Philadelphia, maybe San Francisco, actually the U.S. Mint has operated many mints throughout history, and perhaps the least remembered was the U.S. Mint in Manila in the Philippines, the only U.S. mint to be operated outside of North America. And that mint and the coins that the U.S. minted for the Philippines say a lot about the history of the era, from the dawn of U.S. imperialism to the bloody fighting of the Second World War. It is history that deserves to be remembered. Ferdinand Magellan first claimed the Philippines for the Spanish crown when he arrived there in 1521. Monetary policy in the colony was complex. Many regional currencies entered the economy, and locals struck illegal coins to ease problems with supply. The Spanish peso coin, also known as the Spanish dollar or pieces of 8, would be physically cut into 8 pieces to use as fractional currency. In 1857, the Spanish required accounts to be kept in pesos, made up of 100 centavos, and in 1861 opened the Casa de Moneda, which would mint coins locally. By the mid-19th century, the Spanish Empire was in a deep decline, and the far-off province's mint was poorly managed. Queen Isabella II was deposed in 1868, but the Casa de Moneda minted coins with her face and the 1868 date for 4 more years. When King Alfonso died in 1885, he was succeeded by his then unborn son, but from 1885 to 1897, the coins minted bore Alfonso's face and the 1885 date. The Spanish-American War began in February 1898, instigated by the sinking of the USS Maine in the Havana, Cuba harbor. The short war was a complete American victory, with the superior American Navy proving decisive. The American force blockading Manila staged an attack on the city on August 13th, unaware that peace protocols had been signed the day before in Washington, D.C. Sometimes called the Mock Battle of Manila, Spanish and American forces had negotiated the terms of the battle days before, mostly as a means of keeping the large Philippine Independence Army from occupying the city center. The Spanish officially gave up the Philippines in December for $20 million, and the Philippines were run under the insular government of the Philippine Islands, which ultimately reported up to the U.S. Department of War, and that's why the governors were called governors general. Fighting with Philippine independence groups started almost immediately, and some groups were still opposing U.S. control till 1913. The Philippines were unique in that they are the only American territory which had special coinage minted for it, due in part to the weak state of the economy after the years of war. The first coins made for the American Philippine territory were minted at the San Francisco and Philadelphia mints. They based the new coinage on the Spanish currency, minting silver pesos as well as 50, 20, 10, 5, and 1 centavo pieces. Philippine sculptor Malicio Figueroa designed the obverses, with a seated man for the base metal pieces and a standing woman for the silver ones. The Denver Mint would eventually mint some Filipino coinage in 1944 and 45. In 1904, the U.S. demonetized all of the currencies in the territory. The currency of the island was standardized as the gold peso, which was locked in value at a rate of 2 pesos for $1 US, and several funds were started to maintain the value of the currency. It's interesting to note that when first minted, the 1903 peso actually had slightly more silver than the U.S. Morgan silver dollar, although it was worth only half as much. In 1907, a rise in silver prices led to a reduction in the peso's silver content, but the value relative to the dollar remained the same. In 1908, San Francisco took over the minting of base metal coins and produced most of the island's coins until 1920. The measure that Theodore Roosevelt signed in 1902 that authorized the minting of Filipino coins actually said that the coin should be minted in Manila if practicable. But it took 18 years for that to happen. The First World War dramatically reshaped the global economy. By 1915, the Philadelphia Mint had taken over much of the business of minting South American coins when European mints became preoccupied. The war also drove the San Francisco Mint to dedicate more of its resources to meeting the increased domestic demand for coins. The war also caused an economic boom in the Philippines thanks to a huge demand for hemp, coconut oil, and sugar. The coin shortage became dire enough that the Philippine National Bank produced cardboard bills to replace 10, 20, and 50 centavo coins in 1917. An act establishing the Mint of the Philippine Islands was signed by the Governor General on February 16, 1918. Dr. Albert P. Fitzsimmons, the insular treasurer, was sent to the U.S. to procure the necessary equipment and to study the organization, installing of machinery, and the operation of United States mints. Because of the war, the equipment could not be found commercially, so it was obliged to approach the Philadelphia Mint, which had much of the needed machinery and was willing to manufacture the rest. Dr. Fitzsimmons was transferred from the Treasury to lead the Mint, primarily because of his poor leadership at Treasury had widely been panned. At the end of 1919, the Mint equipment arrived under supervision of Philadelphia Mint staff, who oversaw the installation and training of Filipino personnel. The Mint was not housed in a new building, but given the first floor of the older Aduana building, which it shared with the Treasury, Senate, and other government offices. The first coins were minted on July 15, 1920, including a handful of commemorative medals numismatists now called the so-called Wilson dollar. In 1920, the Manila Mint struck nearly 7 million Filipino coins, along with more than 5,000 of the commemorative medals. But bad news was already on the horizon. The end of the war ended the demand for Filipino materials. Additionally, the Philippine National Bank, established in 1916 in part to extend loans to manufacturers and exporters, had overextended itself through loans, especially to businesses that members of its board were directly involved with. Poor American monetary policy and the collapse of commodity prices sunk the economy and caused hyperinflation. President Harding sent a mission under former Governor General William Forbes and Army General Leonard Wood to investigate conditions in the Philippines. And though Fitzsimmons had performed well at the Mint, it was clear he wouldn't escape blame for his poor handling of the Treasury. He resigned in May of 1921 and returned to the States. The Filipino legislature ordered the Mint to be folded back into the Treasury, abolishing the role of Mint Director. The Mint had 59 employees in November of 1921, but by 1923 only 3 remained, including a mechanic to look after the equipment. Very few coins were minted in 1922, and minting ceased completely before the end of the year. The Mint remained closed until January 2, 1925, when the recovery was underway and it began minting 5 centavo coins. From 1920 to 22, the coins had no mint mark, but when the Mint restarted in 1925, they used the M mint mark. For the entirety of its existence, the Manila Mint only struck a handful of 1 peso coins, and those that it did strike were commemoratives. In 1935, the Philippines was given self-governing Commonwealth status, along with a plan for a 10-year transitional period that would lead to independence in 1946. The Philippines wrote their own constitution, which was approved by President Roosevelt and ratified by popular vote in the islands in 1935. Manuel Quezon became the first president in November that year. The Mint struck a 10,000 Roosevelt Quezon coins in celebration. The Mint did not strike any regular issued pesos for the same reason that the American Morgan silver dollar was short-lived, as they were unpopular in circulation. Most of the pesos minted by the San Francisco Mint between 1907 and 1912 remained in government hands to guarantee silver certificates. The Mint produced a huge number of coins between 1936 and 38 to flood the islands with the new reverse designs, which now had the Philippine coat of arms to replace the arms of the U.S. territories. The Manila Mint also produced a special coinage for exclusive use at the Colonial leper colony. By the time the Americans arrived, there were an estimated 4,500 cases of leprosy in the Philippines, and several homes run by friars to care for them. The U.S. chose instead to isolate the afflicted in an attempt to eliminate the disease, and chose the island of Colonial as the site of the colony. The patients there ran a civic society, complete with police, plumbing, and a council. It was erroneously feared that leprosy could spread by touching items touched by the afflicted, and by law the colony was not allowed to use regular currency, nor was anyone else allowed to use the leper colony coins. Around 169,000 coins were struck, mostly at the Manila Mint. On December 8, 1941, shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan bombed Manila, doing damage to the Aduana building. Though the damage was not serious, the Mint shut down for the rest of the war. The Japanese may have operated the Mint themselves, but replaced the local coins with paper centavos and pesos, now known as Japanese invasion money, or to the locals as Mickey Mouse money, because it had no value and was not real. By the end of the war, hyperinflation had forced the Japanese to print 1,000-peso bills, which they were printing even as they abandoned Manila. The Japanese took over the islands quickly. Most of the American forces had retreated to the defensive positions of Bataan by the 1st of January 1942, and General MacArthur declared Manila an open city on December 26, giving up the city without a fight in the hopes of limiting damage to the city and its population. The entirety of the Filipino treasury remained in Manila, millions in paper notes, 17 million silver pesos, and more in silver and gold bullion. To protect it, it was loaded onto a flotilla of ships that crossed the bay to Corregidor Island on December 27th. On February 3rd, the submarine USS Trout dropped off thousands of rounds of anti-aircraft ammunition and took aboard $2 million worth of bullion and some 630,000 silver pesos as ballast. The paper currency was eventually burned, while the remaining pesos and bullion stayed in the underground tunnels on the island. Corregidor held out for several more months, even after soldiers at Bataan surrendered on April 9th. Knowing they would have to surrender, they chose to dump the coins in Caballo Bay, which provided some cover from Japanese soldiers. They drew lines between several local landmarks, and where they crossed, literally X marks the spot, they dumped 2,630 boxes full of silver pesos, some 390 tons over 6 nights starting on April 26th. Corregidor fell on May 6th. Some of the dumped coins would be recovered by the Japanese later that year, using first Filipino and then American divers, who deliberately hampered the recovery effort and funneled silver to POW camps. Official tallies say the Japanese pulled out fewer than 400 of the boxes, while the U.S. and Philippines recovered millions of pesos in 1946 and 47. Some estimates suggest several million coins may still lay on the floor of the bay. The battle to retake Manila in 1945 was the worst urban fighting in the theater and left the city heavily damaged. The Etiwara building was used as a fortress in the last days of fighting and was completely bombed out by the time the shooting stopped. In 2012, Coin World magazine reported that an obverse die of the Wilson Memorial coins was found in a soldier's estate. The warrant officer's account said the building was left open for weeks after the fighting and was heavily looted. The building was rebuilt after the war, occupied by officers of the National Treasury and then the Central Bank, and finally the Commission on Elections. A fire gutted the building in 1979 and has been abandoned since. For decades, it has been envisioned as the future home of the National Archive of the Philippines, and as recently as June 2019, funding had been promised for the effort, although for now, it remains in ruins. The Philippines were granted independence in 1946 as promised, but their mint was destroyed and no new coins were minted in the Philippines until 1978. Some coins were minted in international mints in the interim, but the Manila Mint, which was supposed to be part of U.S. nation building, was never reconstructed. Still, the coins that were minted there say a lot about Filipino and American history at the time, from the years that they were minted to the years that they weren't. They represent a country that was transitioning from the colonial era to the modern era, interrupted and shaped by some of the most devastating and influential conflicts in human history. The coins that were minted at the Manila Mint, from the designs on them to the numbers that were minted, well, that all has meaning. Meaning beyond even what was bought with the coins or whose pockets they rattled in. And those historic coins, although they are no longer currency, well, they tell a story. And like the silver pesos that are at the bottom of Manila Bay, all it takes to find the story is to look.